Right now, you are warm, and you didn't even have to try. The central heating in your home runs silently in the background. There is a heavy winter coat hanging by your door that you didn't have to track down or kill anything to make. There is food sitting in your kitchen that will still be perfectly edible next week, no matter how low the temperature drops outside your window. Now, imagine taking all of that away. Strip away the insulation, the concrete, the electricity, and the grocery stores.
Imagine standing outside with nothing but your bare skin, facing a winter so profoundly cold. It could stop your heart and kill you in your sleep.
Before you even have a chance to wake up. For 99% of human history, that wasn't a worst-case survival scenario. That was just called November. For hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors didn't just endure one bad season. They lived through actual, merciless ice ages. We are talking about colossal sheets of glacial ice covering entire continents,
where the ambient cold could reduce a human being to a frozen corpse in a matter of hours.
And yet somehow, they made it. You are the living, breathing proof of their victory. Every single person in your direct lineage lived long enough to pass life down to the next generation, which means every single one of them won a
high-stakes war against winter that they absolutely could not afford to lose.
So how did they do it? How does a soft, hairless primate that evolved in the tropical heat of Africa survive the absolute coldest weather this planet has ever thrown at humanity? It is one of the greatest survival stories ever told.
And almost nobody realizes just how close we came to losing it all.
To understand the magnitude of what they were up against, we have to drop the modern romanticized idea of winter. This wasn't a cozy afternoon with a cup of hot cocoa by a brick fireplace.
It was brutal, unrelenting survival.
During the peak of the last ice age, roughly 26,000 to 19,000 years ago, vast glaciers sat heavily on top of Europe, Asia, and North America.
The landscape was a flat, frozen tundra.
There were no forests to block the wind, just wide open spaces where Arctic gales could sweep across the earth completely unimpeded. Trees were incredibly hard to find.
And food completely vanished for months at a time.
Biologically speaking, humans are absolutely not built for this. Our bodies still act like we belong in the African savanna. We don't possess thick fur to trap heat. We don't have a thick, insulated layer of blubber like a seal or a walrus. We can't slow our heartbeat down, crawl into a den, and sleep through the misery like a cave bear. If you take a modern human, strip away their clothes, and drop them into a true Arctic winter, they have hours to live.
The core temperature drops, the organs shut down, and it's over.
The animals surrounding our ancestors were engineered for this environment. Mammoths were walking fortresses of fur and fat. Reindeer had specialized hooves and could simply migrate thousands of miles to find warmer pastures. Humans had none of those evolutionary advantages.
On paper, we should have been one of the very first species to go extinct when the world froze.
We had the wrong bodies in the wrong place at the worst possible time. But we had two things those animals didn't: a brain that could plan for the future, and hands that could construct the things our biology left out. The entire survival strategy started with fire. Without it, nothing else worked. Humans had been utilizing fire for a very long time, at least 300,000 to 400,000 years. But by the time the worst of the Ice Age hit, fire wasn't just a convenient tool for cooking. It was the focal point of human existence. And our ancestors became absolute masters of thermodynamics. When archaeologists excavated Ice Age fire pits in modern-day Ukraine, they didn't find the remains of casual, messy campfires.
Instead,
they uncovered highly engineered, stone-lined fireplaces. Some of these structures were designed so perfectly that they burned at temperatures exceeding 600 degrees Celsius. That's over 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit. But out on the open tundra, what was a luxury? You couldn't just gather dry branches when there were no trees for miles. So humans adapted. They discovered that if you burn the internal fat and heavy leg bones of large megafauna like mammoths, you get a fire that burns incredibly hot and lasts much longer than wood. Fire gave them a pocket of the tropics in the middle of a frozen wasteland. It cooked their meat, hardened the tips of their hunting spears, and provided precious hours of light during the bleak months when the sun barely peeked over the horizon.
But fire has one fatal flaw.
You can't take it with you.
You can't take it with you.
The moment you step away from the hearth to hunt or gather, the cold is waiting for you. To survive, humans had to figure out how to carry the warmth of the fire on their own bodies. They did something no other animal on Earth could do. They stole the evolutionary adaptations of other creatures. At first, it was rudimentary. They threw raw animal skins over their shoulders to block the wind. We know from cut marks left on cave bear paw bones in northern Europe that humans were meticulously skinning apex predators for their fur at least 300,000 years ago. Those heavy bear hides made excellent, windproof winter capes. But a loose skin wrapped around your shoulders is leaky. Heat escapes through every gap, and if you are tracking a herd of horses in a sub-zero blizzard, a loose hide will eventually fail you. The turning point came about 30,000 years ago with an invention so incredibly small it sounds almost trivial. The sewing needle. Carved carefully from thin pieces of bird bone or mammoth ivory, with a tiny eyelet drilled into the end, the needle changed everything. One prominent anthropologist argued that the bone needle is arguably the most important technological invention in human history. And he has a point. The needle meant humans could finally sew. It meant transitioning from wearing a blanket to wearing fitted clothes. Suddenly, you could create tailored sleeves that closed tightly around the wrists, sealed seams that trapped body heat, trousers that protected the legs, and multiple layers of insulation. They didn't stop at fur, either. They used flexible deer hide to cut the wind, crafting fitted mittens and waterproof leather boots. Before heading out into the freezing air, hunters would rub a thick layer of animal fat, called tallow, over their exposed faces and necks. It acted as a chemical shield, sealing the skin, locking in moisture, and preventing the freezing Arctic wind from pulling heat away from their blood vessels. And out on the blinding white plains, they faced another silent killer.
Snow blindness.
The intense glare of the sun reflecting off the snow can literally burn your corneas and leave you blind. To fight this, hunters carved thin, horizontal slits into pieces of bone or wood and tied them over their eyes. It was the invention of the world's very first sunglass, thousands of years before the concept of UV rays was ever written down. The popular image of the caveman implies that our ancestors spent the winter huddled deep inside stone caves. But the reality is far more impressive. Out on the vast plains of what is now Russia and Ukraine, there were no caves. There was barely any timber. So, humans built their own architecture using the only massive, sturdy material available: the bones of the mammoths they hunted. At a famous archaeological site called Mezherik, researchers discovered ancient round houses constructed almost entirely out of mammoth skeletons. They used the heavy, massive skulls and jawbones as a solid foundation sunk deep into the frozen earth. They used the long, curved ribs and tusks to arch upward, forming a sturdy dome-shaped frame.
A single shelter could require the bones of over 100 mammoths.
Once the bone skeleton of the house was complete, they packed the exterior with heavy animal hides, thick layers of moss, and dense turf. The result was a highly insulated bunker that held internal heat so effectively that a small fire could keep an entire extended family comfortable in sub-zero temperatures. The design was brilliant in ways that modern engineers are still studying. Many of these winter structures featured a cold trap doorway. The entrance was dug lower than the main living and sleeping platform. Because cold air is heavy and dense, it naturally sank down into the entrance pit and stayed there, creating an invisible thermal barrier that prevented the warm, rising air inside the living space from escaping. They also leaned into the environment by using snow itself as an insulator. They piled massive snowbanks against the outer walls of their shelters. They understood tens of thousands of years before the invention of modern insulation ratings that sitting underneath a heavy blanket of snow was vastly warmer than standing exposed to the open wind above it. Staying warm keeps you alive tonight, but the slow, agonizing killer of winter
is hunger.
For months on end, the ground was frozen solid, meaning there were zero plants to gather, zero roots to dig up, and game animals were scarce. Survival required master-level logistics and food preservation. When an Ice Age tribe made a successful megafauna kill, they didn't just feast and waste the rest. They ran a highly organized food processing operation. The environment itself provided a natural deep freezer, but they took it a step further. They smoked meat over fires, dried it into lean jerky, and pounded it together with melted fat to create high-calorie survival rations. They dug deep pits into the permafrost, creating permanent underground cellars where meat could stay safe from scavengers and fresh for months. There is even archaeological evidence suggesting they weighed massive cuts of mammoth meat down with heavy stones and sank them into the freezing depths of shallow ponds, using the cold water as a natural refrigerator. They wasted absolutely nothing.
Every single bone was cracked open to extract the calorie-dense, life-saving marrow inside.
Their entire year was structurally built around getting ready for the cold. We are the ones who get caught off guard today. We live in a society where we assume the power grid will always function, and we panic when a winter storm knocks out our electricity for 48 hours. They were never caught off guard. A massive portion of their year was spent in calculated preparation.
Perhaps the most overlooked survival tool
our ancestors possessed wasn't fire, needles, or bone houses. It was each other. In an Ice Age winter, privacy wasn't just non-existent.
It was dangerous.
People packed tightly together inside those mammoth bone shelters. They lived, cooked, and slept in close, physical contact. Body heat was a literal, measurable fuel source. In the ancestral past, the individual who demanded their own personal space wasn't lucky.
They were freezing. It was the isolated individuals, the ones left without a tribe to press against, who perished first in a severe cold snap.
But we shouldn't romanticize this past as entirely peaceful.
The pressure of winter was immense.
Resources were incredibly tight, and when the cold went too deep and the stored meat ran out, humans faced desperate, horrific choices.
Skeletons from various Ice Age sites bear the unmistakable marks of cannibalism. Survival cannibalism born from absolute, terrifying desperation.
Where humans had to consume their own to keep the flame of the species alive.
Over thousands of years, the pressure of the cold even altered human biology. The Yagan people of Tierra del Fuego lived in a freezing, subantarctic environment while wearing almost no clothing. To survive, their metabolic rates adapted to run significantly hotter than ours, producing more internal body heat from the inside out. They rested in a deep, tight squatting position that pulled their limbs close to their core, minimizing surface area and trapping their own body heat. And at a Spanish site called the Pit of Bones, scientists studying human ancestors from 430,000 years ago found bizarre, cyclical damage inside the bone tissue. The growth marks stop and start like clockwork, showing signs of extreme vitamin D deficiency and interrupted development.
It is the exact same bone pattern you see in animals that hibernate.
Some researchers have put forward a staggering theory that during the worst, lowest points of prehistoric winters, when food was utterly non-existent, early humans may have retreated into deep caves, slowed their metabolic rates down to a crawl,
and entered a state of semi-hibernation to wait out the frost.
While the theory is still highly debated in the scientific community, the very fact that serious anthropologists are arguing over whether your ancestors slept through the winter like cave bears shows just how extreme the evolutionary pressure truly was. Every winter was a test that you could easily fail.
And failing meant the absolute end of your bloodline.
What fascinates me as we look back at this timeline is the sheer velocity of human progress. In a couple of thousand years, which is a mere blink of an eye in our 300,000-year history, we went from stacking the skulls of giants in a makeshift tundra bunkers to tapping a digital button on a wall to adjust the temperature of our entire house. The deadliest, most terrifying force our ancestors ever faced,
The freezing hand of winter,
has been reduced to a minor inconvenience that we complain about during the brief walk from our front door to a heated car. We beat winter so completely. We built walls so thick And we made energy so cheap that most of us have completely forgotten it was ever a war we were losing. We sit inside our perfect, climate-controlled rooms, isolated and secure, entirely disconnected from the frozen wild that forged us. But the next time you step outside into a bitter, freezing winter wind, don't just pull your coat tight and complain about the weather. Take a deep breath of that cold air, feel the chill hit your skin, and remember the heavy bone houses, the tiny bone needles, and the ancient body piles that kept the fire alive. You are not just a person trying to get through a cold day. You are the living consequence of a line of absolute survivors
who refused to freeze.